Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video, I'll show you how I painted the SENESCHAL from the Legions of Nagash for Warcry. In this video, I'll go step by step how I painted the SENESCHAL to a tabletop ready standard with mostly contrast paints. This is quite a short video, but if you want something a bit longer and more in-depth in real time, then check out the Legions of Nagash Necromancer, and I've also done another video for the Skeleton Warrior, and with all these three videos combined, that'll be all the techniques you need to paint your Legions of Nagash. Right, let's get started. So here's the model, all primed and ready to go, and they're great looking miniatures, the Legions of Nagash, but with so many, I wanted this to be quite a fast method. And so I started off by priming with the Citadel colour Wraithbone, and this is the contrast undercoat paint, and assembled with Citadel plastic glue. For any gaps I missed, I just took some ceramite white base paint and went over those, but any base paint will do. In this video we'll mostly be using the Citadel colour contrast paints, with some technical paints and layer paints too, and the brush I mostly use is the Wargamer Army painter brush, but I've been recently using the Kolinsky synthetic brushes and they're brilliant. Here we go, the first paint we're going to use is the Contrast Black Templar, and it's really important to give these contrast paints a really good shake every time you use them. So every time I use a paint here in this video, I'll be shaking them first. And this black is going to be for all the leather straps and the handle of the axe weapon, the boots, and all those kind of things. In total, we're using about 9 paints for this model, so it's quite fast. Most of those paints are for the metals, so we're only using a few contrast paints for the different sections, and this Black Templar is really great for doing like black leather effects. For these smaller areas, I'm not putting too much paint on the brush here, but I'm using enough so that I'm not going back and forth to the pot too many times, and so I'm just putting that on there, pushing and pulling the paint where I want it to go, and I'm trying to start and end my brush strokes in the areas where I want most of the paint to build up. And so here on the shoe, this is like a little bit of a larger area with some deeper recesses, so I've got a little bit more paint on the brush, and then I'm pushing that really into those areas where there's going to be more shade, and we'll try and get some contrast there, leaving the areas that would get a natural highlight with less paint on. And with the contrast paint, as long as you put a good amount on first like I've done here, you've got plenty of time to work with it, push and pull that paint around and really guide it to where you want to go. But the great thing with the contrast paints is they really want to run into those cracks and crevices on their own. And so pop it on, push it around, and let that contrast paint do its job. There we go, so just finishing that boot, and then we'll do the same on the other one. And if you haven't subscribed already, it'd be awesome if you could. It's a great way to keep up to date with all the new videos that come out. And if you like what you see on the channel and you'd like to support it, then please consider taking a look at my Patreon page. We've got a great community there where we talk on Discord, share our hobby photos, and help each other out with all our painting projects. And you can get some awesome benefits you won't see anywhere else. So it'd be great to see you there, and I'll put the link in the description below. But let's get back to the model. So now I'm working on the handle and still going with the Black Templar there. And again, not too much paint now, because you don't want too much on this area, but I'm just starting it in that handle where the hand is wrapped around it, so we'd want more paint there, and then just wiping off a little bit more at the bottom as well. So anywhere where two different materials meet, I tend to have a little bit more paint to give a little bit of a kind of shadow where they overlap. And so I'm just spreading that round, pushing it along, and then once that's drying, we're going to move on to the Contrast Blood Angels Red, and this is going to be for the cloak. And I'm going really heavy now, so you can see there's a lot more paint there. And I pushed it on in one of the deeper recesses first, and then I'm pushing that paint around where I want it to go. And if it starts building up on the flatter areas, then I just wick it away with the brush and then move it to one of the recesses. But you can see as soon as I put it on, that paint just ran straight into all those folds, and that's where it's going to give a real nice effect. And for those creases, like on the leg there, you've got some really nice creases, and this is where contrast paint comes into its own. It works really well for those kind of areas. I find on the flatter areas, it can not be as good a finish, but if you put one coat on and then put a second coat of the same colour, but mix that second coat with 3 parts contrast to 1 part paint, the contrast medium, sorry, 3 parts contrast medium to 1 part paint, and then you put a second coat of that over the top, then that can really smooth out those areas where there aren't many creases. And I found that works really nicely. But in this case, we're just going to go with 1 coat of the Blood Angels Red all over, because later on we'll do some dry brushing effects, and that's going to really finish this off really nicely and tie it in to the narrative of the models. Loads of things you can do with these contrast paints to get different effects. We were talking about it on the Discord channel about a couple of days ago, about how you can put like an orange underneath this red, and then when you do a mix of contrast paint and the red over a coat of the orange, then that gives you a real deep looking colour, but also that orange comes through in the highlights. And that's something I did on the Scions of the Flame. Right, now we're moving on to the next colour, and this is the Contrast Skeleton Horde. A perfect paint for all the bones and skulls, and so for this skeleton warband you'll be using this a lot, and this is going to go all over it. This one doesn't dry very dark, so I find I put loads on, get it right in the recesses, and really load it up, especially on the arms here. You'll see I put quite a bit on, and I'm really pushing it into that recess, and in where the finger bones have all got the kind of little shadows and everything. So I'm going against the grain of the miniature and almost wiping the paint off, and then that paint really wants to go in there, and that's going to give a nice deep shadow. But on the raised areas, this skeleton horde, it dries quite pale, so real nice effect. But I do find, especially when you're doing the skulls, and if you've done any bases with the skulls from the skull pack, the Citadel Skulls pack, then really push that into the eye sockets, and almost so it looks like it's too full of paint, and then that'll dry and leave a really nice dark recess. So here I'm putting quite a lot on the neck and that little bit of the spine backbone there. There's quite a lot, but that's going to dry just perfect. Right, now we're moving on to the metal, and we're going to take some lead belcher. This is a base paint, and this is going to go over all the metallic parts of the model. And these Seneschal and the white guards, they've got a lot of armour and metalwork, so this is a great technique to use for them. And later on you'll see we're going to use some technical paints that give a really good aged effect for these models. And the idea with my warband was that the Necromancer brought this army back from like a blood-soaked, sandy, dusty desert that had dried up over thousands of years, and these armies had been buried under there. The weapons had got rusty, their armour was all kind of corroded, and so I wanted a real dusty, grimy look to this warband, as if they'd been drawn out of the earth and they were covered in dust and march into battle. And I kind of used the dry brush on the robes to get that effect, but also you'll see on this metalwork we make it look really aged in a real quick way. And the goal with these miniatures, and pretty much all the miniatures I paint, is to get a real nice tabletop ready standard that's quite quick to do, and it's enjoyable fun, builds confidence, and the idea is you could get a warband painted up really nicely within a weekend and be playing quite quickly. So that's my kind of goal with all these painting videos. But the main thing is to come away with it pleased with what you've done, happy, and some confidence to go on and do some more in the future. Right, now we're on to the Retributer Armor, and this is a real flash colour, and this is going to go on these kind of wings on the helmet here and all the gold parts of the miniature. If you didn't want to use this paint, or you don't have it, but you've got the lead belcher, then you could just use the lead belcher, and then when it's dried, put a Guilliman Flesh or an Agorist Dune contrast paint over the top, and that's going to give you a real nice bronzy kind of or gold look. The Guilliman Flesh is more like a bronze effect, whereas the Agorist Dunes will give you a really nice golden yellow colour. So that's another way to save on the paints if you've already got those contrast paints, but you don't have this Balthazar gold. Then you certainly just use the lead belcher, a coat of contrast paint, and that's really nice. There we go, and I'm taking my time here, and if you do make a mistake, then you can go over and correct it. Certainly with the metallic ones, you've got lots of like strong colours, so if you needed to go back over with that lead belcher, you're going to cover it up. But just be careful on the areas, or more careful on the areas where you've done the contrast paints, because you would have to take that back to the base colour, like a white or wraithbone, and then go again with a contrast. And that could be a little bit scruffy on those lines, so just be careful and take your time. With the metal, it doesn't matter too much because that's easy to cover up, but not so easy on those areas where we've used the contrast paint. Okay, now I'm going to take some Bugman's Glow. This is a base paint, and I've got this very vegan makeup brush, And this is brilliant for dry brushing, and it's cheap. These are like £3 for a couple of makeup brushes, and really soft bristles. And I'm loading them up with that paint, working it into the bristles as I move it around on the paper towel, and then try and take off as much paint as I can to really dry that brush out. And then I test it on my hand to make sure it's not too much paint left. And then this is going to give us the first stage of the dusty, grimy effect on all the robes. And I'm not worrying too much here about going over the belt, but I'm focusing mostly at the bottom. So the idea they come out of that earth, and that's where all the dust has settled all over them. And so you don't have to be too careful in this stage, because it doesn't matter how messy it gets and what other parts of the miniature it touches, because that would naturally happen in this kind of dusty environment. So I'm going all over it there, and then I'm going to take some Rakarth Flesh, another base paint, and I'm not cleaning my brush, so I'm using the same brush and the same method, working it into the bristles and then getting off as much paint as I can on that paper towel or kitchen towel. So this is going to add to that dusty effect, but it's also going to give a little bit of a highlight and bring out some of those raised areas and bring it to life. And you can see already there, I'm just being careful at first because I'm not sure how much paint is on that brush. So I go a little carefully when I first start dry brushing the paint on, and then when I'm happy with how much is on those bristles, that I can be a bit rougher and a bit more confident with the strokes. But there you go, that's really going to bring it to life now, add to that dusty effect, but also give a little bit of a highlight on the material and take away that bright red colour. Right, now this is a technical paint called Typhus Corrosion, and if you haven't used it already, I'd recommend using an old scruffy brush for this, because it's quite like a sandy texture to it, like a gritty texture, and this is perfect for making metal look really old and corroded. And I'm just dabbing it on, and if you want to get it off the edges, I just found I just use my finger and wipe away those edges, because they're still going to be sharp, although they're not going to be looking after their weapons that well. These skeletons are going to still have sharp weapons, and they're still going to do some damage. So you want to have a nice edge to the weapons there. But on all the other metalwork, I'm just dabbing it on, almost like speckling it on, and that's going to give us a real nice aged effect. This is a really quick way to get this effect. I mean, you could paint it and use different coloured paints, and you could even add like rust effects and things like that. But I think if you want to get something done quite quickly, but with a nice effect, then this Typhus Corrosion is perfect. And one pot goes a long way. You know, once you've got one pot, you're probably not going to need any more for a few hundred miniatures for sure. So it's well worth getting. And I'll put links to all the paints we use in the description below, so you can find all these online. Right, now I'm just going back to the Contrast Black Templar, and I want to tidy up the handle. I didn't like how that came out. It got a little bit messy with the Typhus Corrosion as well. So I'm just putting another coat on that and tidying it up a little bit. And so that's going to make it stand out a little bit more as well, which is going to be a nice effect. So yeah, I didn't want that too dusty. I really want to focus the weapon on that corrosion. And now we're going to bring out a highlight on the weapon with some Stormhost Silver. And I've got this flat brush, just a cheap brush, nothing fancy here. And then I'm going to dry brush with this. So again, load the bristles up, work that paint into the kitchen towel, get the brush as dry as we can, and then we're going to use this on all the metalwork just to bring it to life a little bit. That Typhus Corrosion can really dull everything down, and so this really kind of brings out all the different textures and adds to the effect you get from it. And I'm using this on the gold and the silver parts of the metalwork, and this Stormhost Silver works really well over any kind of gold as a highlight. And in the past I've done some edge highlighting or tried to get it as neat as I can, but I really like the effect you get from dry brushing this Stormhost Silver over Lead Belcher and Balthazar Gold. I think it's nice and subtle and gives a good effect, but it certainly works well on this kind of metal where you want an aged effect to it. So here we go, so just going all over it, making sure I'm catching the edges, so I'm putting more pressure on those edges where they're going to get a natural highlight. And that's it, there's our Seneschal all painted to a tabletop ready standard with mostly contrast paints, a bit of dry brushing and some technical paints to give an aged metallic effect. I was really happy how this turned out, and you almost saw it in real time, so it's really quick to do, and I think for the time you take on it, you get some really nice finishes to those different paint techniques. And here he is with his other kind of members of the Warband, all ready for battle, and I've used the same techniques on the White Guards, so you can see there, they all look aged and dusty and ready for war. And if you want to see how I did that cracked base there, I've done a separate video on the bases, and there'll be a link in the description below, and you can also find it on my channel, and that tells you exactly how to do it. And I've also done videos for the Skeleton Warrior, the Necromancer, who's got some amazing abilities, and also the Skeleton Champion. I'll put links to everything we used in the video in the description below, and it'd be great to hear what you think about these methods and whether you've tried them yourself and have you used that technical paint. It'd be awesome to hear from you. So yeah, join in the comment sections below. That'd be awesome. Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.